Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your favorite lawyer again. So today we'll be dealing with the topic constitution or understanding the constitution. And for specific purposes, we're looking at the constitution of Nigeria. Constitution can simply be defined as the basic legal framework on which all other laws derive their essence from. And the constitution defines the structure of the government of the country. It allocates powers to the different levels of government or the different organs of government. Then it also distributes functions and authorities to all the arms of the government. A constitution may be written or unwritten, unitary or federal, flexible or rigid, and this depends on the polity or the society. That is depending on what that nation has agreed. So the major examples I'll give now in this case, since we're using Nigeria as a case study, the Nigerian constitution is written. The Nigerian constitution operates a federal system and it is rigid because you can't just change the constitution like that. There's a lot of process to change the constitution, which we'll look into later in this video. While the famous example of an unwritten constitution is the system that is operated in Britain. In the UK, they operate an unwritten constitution. This doesn't mean that the constitution is not written anywhere, but it is not one specific document like the Nigerian constitution that is one specific document. Currently, the Nigerian constitution is the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended. It has been amended a couple of times, but it's quoted as the Constitution of Nigeria, 1999, because it's not an entire new constitution that was made. It's just few amendments or alterations that have been made along the line. So it's still known as the 1999 Constitution, but as amended in the year it was amended. That's the way it's stated for the Nigerian Constitution. Whereas in the British Constitution that is unwritten, they are coded in booklets. It's not just one binding document. So there are several laws that have been regarded as their constitution over time. So the body of laws that are regarded as a constitution make up the entire or written constitution of Britain. So that is why their constitution is unwritten and it's not as rigid as the Nigerian system. Like I just mentioned, the Nigerian constitution has undergone some radical changes in the past. So we've had the 1960 constitution when Nigeria became an independent nation. Then we had the 1963 constitution and we had the 1979 constitution before we now had the 1999 constitution. So this is the history of the Nigerian constitution till date. Now you notice that the constitution was not just amended these years that have listed 1960, 1963 and 1979. Instead, the constitution was entirely changed these three times. Then up to the 1999 constitution that it was changed entirely. But subsequently to the 1999 constitution, there have just been alterations of just some few parts of the constitution. So that is why the constitution is still the 1999 constitution, but as amended in the years in which there have been alterations. So from the definition of the constitution that I gave earlier, you will see that the constitution is supreme and is binding. That is why it is the basic legal framework on which all other laws of the country rest on. No other law can be inconsistent with the provisions of the constitution. And this is contained in section 1, subsection 3 of the constitution. So if any other law has anything that violates a provision of the constitution, that other law will be void to the extent of its inconsistency with the constitution. So not the entire law will be void, but the specific provisions of the law that violate the constitution will be void. So that is what section 1, subsection 3 of the constitution states. And in fact, the supremacy of the constitution is provided in subsection 1 of the constitution, that the constitution is supreme and it has a binding effect on all persons, on all entities, all organizations throughout the whole Federation of Nigeria. So the supremacy of the constitution is contained in the constitution itself. So it shows that the constitution is supreme and no one is above the constitution. Then subsection 3 of that same section 1 states that the constitution, that any other law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution will be void to the extent of its inconsistency. So this provision that makes the Constitution supreme is a very key feature of constitutional democracy. This is the backbone of constitutional democracy, in that the Constitution is supreme and is binding, affects every other person in the country, affects every entity in the country, every person, whether a legal person or an artificial person, companies, businesses, associations, every registered entity, and all human persons. So it shows that no one is above the law. That is the essence of constitutional democracy. We will now look at the functions or the purposes of the Constitution, so that we'll know what the Constitution seeks to serve, what the Constitution stands for. The first function is that the Constitution establishes the governmental framework. And the governmental framework that the Constitution has established is that it established and created the three arms of government, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And then the Constitution went further to provide for the functions of each of these three arms of government, provides for their powers as what they can do, and provides for where their boundaries stop, which is called checks and balances. This aims to ensure that no arm of government is too powerful, and it ensures that everyone works within the limits of the Constitution. The second function of the Constitution is that it distributes powers between the different levels of government, that is the federal, state, and the local government. The first that we talked about are the arms of the government, that is the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. But the second is the levels of government. And this derives its nature from the Constitution itself, because the Constitution of Nigeria, like I stated earlier, is federal in nature. So the Constitution also provides for and separates the three levels of government accordingly to the federal, the state, and the local government. In doing so, the Constitution also provided for the powers of each of these levels of government. For instance, in the second schedule to the Constitution, it provides for the exclusive legislative list. And this exclusive legislative list lists all the areas of law that the federal legislature can legislate on. In as much as there's the arms of government, the legislation, so this is with respect to the legislative arm of the government. So you can see there's a synergy between the arms of government and the levels of government. So now, with respect to the arms of government, the legislature is now further divided into what the federal legislature can legislate on and what the state legislature can legislate on. Then the concurrent list exclusively states what the federal legislature, that is the National Assembly, can legislate on. Then the residual list states what the state legislatures can legislate on. The local governments don't have a formal legislative unit. Then where both the federal legislature and the state legislature, that the state houses of assembly, can legislate on, is now called the concurrent list. So it's the Constitution that has separated all of these just to aid governance, to aid the smooth running of the governmental affairs of the country. The third function or purpose of the Constitution is the guaranteeing of fundamental rights. Now, this is interesting because everyone talks about the popular phrase human rights. Because of the nature of these rights, they are rights that accrue to someone as a person. Your human rights accrue to you as a person. So I mean, it's a topical thing anytime, any day, and people want to ensure that their rights are protected. But the Constitution of Nigeria provides for the protection of fundamental rights. So the Constitution doesn't refer to them as human rights, but as fundamental rights. And these fundamental rights are provided for in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. And it includes the right to life, the right to the dignity of the human person, the right to your privacy, your private life, the right to your freedom of association. That is why you can belong to any association you want to belong to, as long as it's not an illegal association, because the law does not aid you to do the illegal things. So there's also the right to your freedom of thought and conscience. As the name implies, you have your own conscience and you should be free to choose what you want. Nobody should force you against your conscience. But then you will note that this right to your freedom of conscience doesn't mean that you can now go and talk anyhow against somebody else, because where your own right starts is where another person's own stops, or where your own stops is where the other person's own starts. Constitution also provides for your right to peaceful assembly. So this is why you can engage in peaceful protests as long as it's a peaceful gathering, a peaceful assembly. The Constitution ensures that right. So these are some of the rights that the Constitution of Nigeria provides for, and they are called fundamental rights, according to Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Nigeria. And one thing to note about these rights is that you can go to court to apply to enforce them. So you can go to court to make an application requesting the protection of these rights as provided for in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. So they are not just rights that just exist in the Constitution. You can actually fight for them. You can actually go to court if the rights have been trampled upon and seek for damages if these rights have been trampled upon based on the nature of your case and on the facts on ground. So these are justiciable rights because you can go to court where these rights have been trampled on. The fourth function or purpose of the Constitution is that it provides a limit to the exercise of government powers so that those occupying government positions do not go beyond the limits of their powers. This ensures that people are kept within check and they do not use their governmental powers arbitrarily. The fifth function or purpose of the Constitution is that it provides for accountability and the rule of law. I mentioned this issue of the rule of law at the beginning of this video when I was defining Constitution. So the rule of law simply means that the law rules over everyone, and so nobody is above the law. So that is why the Constitution is supreme. So the Constitution provides for accountability and the rule of law. The sixth and final function of the Constitution that I'll be looking at is that the Constitution provides for the procedure for its own amendment. So in the Constitution, there's a provision for how the Constitution can be amended. And currently, the Constitution provides that two-thirds of the members of the National Assembly, that is the Senate and the House of Representatives, and two-thirds of the state houses of assembly must vote before an amendment of the Constitution can be validly done. So where two-thirds votes of the two houses of the National Assembly and two-thirds of the state houses of assembly cannot be made, the Constitution cannot be amended because you need a minimum of these votes before the Constitution can be validly amended. So the Constitution in itself provides for how the Constitution can be amended. And this is the main reason why the Constitution of Nigeria currently is rigid, because the amendment process is very rigorous and strenuous. We'll now look at the interpretation or the enforcement of the Constitution. This means that the Constitution has provided for instances where the Constitution needs to be interpreted. Let's say two factions or two states have different views of how a provision of the Constitution is to be interpreted. There, the Constitution has provided that the authority or the power to interpret the Constitution itself lies with the judiciary. This is also similar to where the Constitution is to be enforced. The Constitution also provides that with respect to the enforcement of the Constitution, the body that has the powers to ensure the enforcement is also the judiciary, because the judiciary has to make pronouncements before the executive can ensure those enforcements. So in essence, the judiciary plays a very vital role with respect to the interpretation and the enforcement of the Constitution. Again, this speaks to the fact that the Constitution has provided for checks and balances, adequately sharing and allocating functions and powers to the different arms of government and the different levels of government. So in this instance, it is the judiciary as an arm of government that is saddled with the responsibility of interpreting and enforcing the Constitution. So where there are disputes or there are misunderstandings with respect to how a provision of the Constitution is to be interpreted. So where there is a dispute with respect to the interpretation of any provision of the Constitution, the power to determine what the correct interpretation is rests with the judiciary. So the trend of the judiciary interpreting the Constitution has been seen in several cases. There are several landmark cases in which the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria has been upheld as the supreme law that governs all persons, all people, all entities. So you can see that the judiciary has tried to live up to this expectation by ensuring that it has interpreted the Constitution as the ground norm of the country. In conclusion, the Constitution is the lifeblood of Nigeria's democracy, and so it is inherent on every person, every citizen, every individual, and every resident in Nigeria to uphold the Constitution. And you can't uphold the Constitution if you're not informed as to the provisions of the Constitution. So it behoves on everyone to know the provisions of the Constitution and to uphold it. This obligation is not just restricted to lawyers or political office holders, but every citizen is enjoined to uphold the provisions of the Constitution, while the lawyers will also take the lead in doing same. This brings us to the end of this video, and I hope you got value from it. If you got value, kindly make your comment in the comment section below. Also, please do well to like this video, and also please subscribe to the channel so that you get more updates as we upload more videos. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.